Q&A portion of today's talk. If you didn't receive a piece of paper, please raise your hand and one of our volunteers will bring you a piece of paper for you to write your question on, and then they will pass it back to them and they will bring it up for me and I will ask the questions to the speaker. First of all, thank you so much for your talk. A little bit about you yourself. What is your educational background?
Well, I graduated from Temple University with a BS in history education, and then I also graduated with a Master of Arts in history education from Ursuline College.
Okay. And how long have you been in Korea, and what brought you to Korea specifically?
Well, I originally came to Korea to work at a hagwon, as many people do. I've been here for nearly 20 years, and worked at many different places. I currently work, of course, at Gwangju Foreign School, and for the majority of the time, I've been working at foreign schools.
Okay, so you've been here quite a long time then. How's your Korean?
Not as good as it should be.
Okay. And I guess just one more question about you being in Korea here for so long. What's your favorite thing about being in Korea?
Oh, it's hard to say. I love so many things about Korea. The culture, the environment. I love hiking. I love the mountains. I really enjoy being in Korea. I have for all. That's why I want to basically make this my home for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, transitioning from yourself to the subject of today, have you been yourself to see the pyramids?
Yes. I went to Egypt in 2002, and it was a remarkable experience. I'd love to go again. We'll see. Maybe I will, if I can.
Fair enough. And can you give us a brief explanation of your research methods regarding this book? You mentioned one author a few times. Is it primarily from this one author's book, or how did you come about all of your conclusions you shared with us today?
It sort of began when I read a book called Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. It's a magnificent book, and there's several chapters on Egypt. He makes the suggestion that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb. Quite a few authors actually have made the suggestion that the Great Pyramid is not a tomb. And so basically, I suppose what I'm trying to do here is sort of synthesize a lot of information that I've read in these books and sort of put it together in one sort of package that can hopefully persuade people that that monument is not a tomb.
Okay. Yeah. So jumping right to that, the pyramids are not a tomb. You mentioned that this is a 4th dynasty. If the traditional interpretation is to be believed, it's a 4th dynasty Egyptian tomb. What is a typical 4th dynasty tomb look like? Like the pictures you showed us, are those earlier, later?
Yeah, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are much later tombs. Okay, we're talking. Those are basically tombs from the New Kingdom, mostly the New Kingdom. And so to tell you what 4th dynasty tombs look like, because it is sort of supposed that all 3 Giza pyramids and the Step Pyramid, etc., it is supposed that they are all tombs. In fact, if they are not tombs, then we may not know what a 4th dynasty tomb looks like. One may not have been discovered yet.
So we don't have 4th dynasty, if those aren't tombs, we don't have 4th dynasty tombs to serve as comparanda.
No, I don't believe that at this point we have discovered an actual 4th dynasty tomb.
Okay. You mentioned the step pyramids as well, like in Saqqara. Now that's something you didn't bring up in your talk. So if we accept your conclusion that they're not tombs but monuments, are there Egyptian pyramids which securely, we know, do function as tombs?
I would say that's doubtful. I speak mainly about the Great Pyramid. My main sort of idea is to disprove that the Great Pyramid itself was served as a tomb. Now, it is true that no no royal mummies dating from that period have been found in any Egyptian pyramid. So it is a difficult question to answer if indeed any Egyptian pyramid is a tomb. It's a very difficult question to answer as to why no royal mummies have ever been discovered in them.
Okay, going back to the traditional interpretation for a moment, according to the traditional interpretation, how long did it take to construct the Great Pyramid, just the Great Pyramid? How long was the traditional date of construction?
It's thought that it took 20 years to construct the Great Pyramid. This, of course, is on the word of Herodotus, who I don't see any reason why we should give any validation to that idea. Well, you have to remember, Herodotus visited the monument when it was already an ancient monument. I don't know what the Egyptians were telling him at the time. Obviously, they told him it took 20 years to construct. I don't think those Egyptians had any idea what they were talking about at that time. If you do the math, it becomes extremely difficult to believe because the Great Pyramid is constructed with well over 2 million blocks of stone. If you want us to believe that, and they can't have a night shift when they're working, that when it's dark, it's dark. You could probably work a maximum of 12 hours a day. If you figure out how much you could work in 20 years, it just doesn't add up. You'd probably have to assemble, and remember the perfection with which they're assembling these blocks. You'd have to assemble a block perfectly in place, probably every 2 minutes, non-stop for 20 years to go with the 20-year theory.
And if, again, back to the original interpretation, so there has been a sort of shift recently in the conception of how the tomb was constructed, slave labor via sort of voluntary labor for the state. Do you have anything to say about that, about recent archaeological finds for the construction camps for the workers?
Yeah, well, the current idea now is that it was not, in fact, slave labor. That it was actually a paid workforce that built the pyramid. Beyond, and I think they have discovered evidence to show that that it was probably a very large paid workforce.
Okay. So one of the problems you mentioned radiocarbon dating once in your discussion with the inventory stela. Now, I think many of our audience probably know what radiocarbon dating is, but the problem with something like a stone monument is you can't radiocarbon date the stone. What about the work camps, which are pretty securely associated with the date of construction of the pyramid? Have they been able to radiocarbon date artifacts from the work camps to help with the construction?
There are certain objects that were discovered within the pyramid itself that were metallic or wood. They have radiocarbon dated those objects, and generally they get an earlier date for the age of the pyramid, just carbon dating the objects that they found. Now, it's not a lot earlier. I mean, you may be talking about a discrepancy of a few hundred years, but if the Great Pyramid is even a few hundred years older than is thought now, well then that would clearly indicate that it didn't have much to do with Khufu.
Okay.
If that's true.
Okay, but not on the magnitude of the 10,000 years before present, is that correct? The Orion Belt alignment that you mentioned earlier, not on the magnitude of thousands of years earlier.
Probably not. Yeah, it's really hard to say when exactly it was built, but no, I'm not trying to advocate that it was built in 10,000 BC or something. I'm not saying that.
Okay.
There is a strange correlation though, because the correlation of the Giza pyramids on the ground and matches absolutely precisely with the belt stars of Orion in the sky at that date, for a reason I'm not really sure.
I just mentioned the inventory stela that you talked briefly about. In your discussion, I didn't catch, did you say where that was found, what its association with the Great Pyramid was, physically, etc.?
Yeah. I don't recall the exact location of where it was found, but it was a stele that was discovered in a later dynasty, and this is part of the reason that Egyptologists discredit it is because it was at a later time period that it was discovered, but I don't see any reason why that stele the information on the stele couldn't have been transferred from perhaps an earlier one, and so forth. I don't think that necessarily discounts the information on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going to the Al Mamun tunnel that he constructed, as you showed us, his original entry point was fairly close to the real entry. Lucky guess, or did he have some sort of information to go on that it's like out of the 4 sides, he had the correct side and roughly about there?
Yeah, I think, I'm not positive, but I think it's probably a kind of coincidence that he happened to be so close to the original entrance. Now, of course, he would not have tunneled in from there had he known of the original entrance. Yeah, I think I would guess a coincidence. And I'd also guess that, well, I mean, it was on the same side of the pyramid. It wasn't terribly close to it. Still, the original one being quite a bit up and to the left from there. But yeah, I think his men, once they discovered that, would have been really upset that they were so close to that original entrance, and all the work they did.
Staying on the topic just for a moment of the Al Mamun early expedition that you mentioned, you mentioned an anecdote about him planting money for his people to find. Is there any attribution for that? What's the source for that?
Well, the source for I think the best source I have for the Al Mamun accounts and his expedition is from a book called Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. It's a fantastic book. It's one of my favorite books dealing with the subject. And yes, and I've always thought, how reliable were Tompkins' sources regarding the Al Mamun expedition. I think, and I've often wondered, well, could I find Arabic? Because the original sources would have been from Arabic historians that went on the journey with him. I would love to find sources like that to corroborate, but I haven't yet. But I do think the Tompkins source is a very good one.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned that the earlier date, you're not advocating for the 10,000 for present date. However, do you have any conjecture to add for who exactly might have built the pyramids, when they might have built them? Are you advocating a pre-Egyptian date, or would you still guess within the ancient Egyptian civilization? Just conjecturing.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot.
No. I think it does fall within the somewhere within Egyptian history. It may be a little earlier than Khufu's reign. Who knows? It may have been built by Khufu, but it's important to remember that if it was built by Khufu, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was built to be his tomb. He may have built it for any number of other purposes, if in fact he built it. So yeah, within the Egyptian period, I strongly believe that they had a kind of technology at that point that we don't credit them with having. I think they had a kind of advanced technology that somehow was lost over the millennia that we don't credit them with having. They certainly used a lot more than copper chisels to make that monument.
So you mentioned the technological discrepancy. Clearly they did work in granite, and other civilizations did work in granite. How you discount the idea of using copper chisels? How did they manage to work granite blocks?
Well, that's the question, and as I said, I can't give you a real solid answer on that because like I said, I believe that whatever technology they used it must have been lost. I mean, you're talking about, again, if you want to hollow out a granite box, the kind of technology you need for that is extraordinary. Really, an almost industrial age technology. And it wasn't until we got to the industrial age, that's why Flinders Petrie is probably one of the best Egyptologists you can read, because he was the first Egyptologist with an understanding of industrial age technology to examine the monument, and he realized that none of it made sense given what we credit their technology as being. as he said, the precision is it's like optical precision on a scale of acres. What technology is that? And it's not like we've dug up these amazing machines that they must have used to do it. As so far, we haven't. So at this point, we just have to say, until we, well, truthfully, we really don't know exactly how they did it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So to bring it from the larger topic back to yourself a little bit, what stimulated this intense interest in the pyramids for you? Was it your trip to Egypt in 2002, or does your interest predate that visit?
It does predate it, but not by too much. Again, it was that Hancock book, Fingerprints of the Gods, which I would recommend to anyone. That's really how it all got started, and I basically just picked up as many books as I could get my hands on after that time, and yeah, the Egypt trip was great, but I have learned a lot more since the Egypt trip, so I would love to go back, and I think it'd be a richer experience for me if I went back, and hopefully I will.
Excellent. This next question will be our last question for today. Your topic is very interesting and did generate a lot of questions. If we didn't have a chance to ask your question, please feel free to address the speaker directly after the talk. So you are a history teacher at the International School. So aside from the pyramids, what is your favorite historical topic to teach or just discuss?
Aside from the pyramids, well, probably the Renaissance is a really it's one of my favorite times. I said the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, etc. Yeah, I just started teaching a new class at our school, which is art history, and of course that can bring a lot of my interest from, say, Renaissance painting and so forth into that class. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, well that concludes today's Q&A portion of GIC Talk. Let's give him a hand for answering our questions.